The entire hall feared the Arab millionaire. No one dared even look him in the eyes. But that day, a simple cleaning lady did something no one ever imagined. 200 people stood frozen. The silence was deafening. What do you think she did to leave him completely humiliated in front of everyone? Tell us where you're watching from, and leave it in the comments. Subscribe and leave your like right now because this story will leave you breathless. The most luxurious event hall in Newport fell into absolute silence when the bucket of ice water descended upon the head of the most feared man in town. The liquid streamed down his perfectly combed black hair, stained his ivory Italian suit, and formed a puddle at the feet of the Arab billionaire who, seconds before, had been publicly humiliating a staff member in front of all the guests. Eliza still held the empty bucket, her arms trembling not from fear but from a courage she never knew she possessed. The scent of expensive cologne mixed with soapy cleaning water created a strange fragrance in the air as drops fell from the businessman's chin onto the imported marble floor. No one dared to breathe. Sometimes respect isn't asked for with words, but demanded with actions that come from the soul, thought Eliza, surprised by her own audacity. In that frozen moment in time, Eliza Merritt, 52 years old, divorced with 2 adult children, understood that she had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The 200 guests, powerful executives, local politicians, celebrities from the Rhode Island coast, stared in shock at the scene that broke every rule of decorum and social hierarchy. The murmur began to rise like a small wave that would soon become a tsunami. In the eyes of the billionaire Karim Al-Mansour, something beyond anger shone. Absolute confusion. In his 4 decades of life, no one had dared to challenge him like this, least of all an English-American woman of middle age in a cleaning uniform who, until that moment, had been as invisible to him as the walls surrounding them. "How dare you?" Karim's voice vibrated with controlled rage that was more threatening than any shout. The Arabic accent marked each syllable as if it were a dagger. "Do you know who I am?" Eliza let the bucket drop, which rolled across the marble with a metallic sound that seemed amplified in the absolute silence. Her calloused hands, witnesses to a life of endless work, trembled now. But her voice, when she finally spoke, sounded firm, clear, as if it came from a deep place within herself that she had just discovered. "I know exactly who you are. The question is, do you know who I am?" Time seemed to stop, as if the Atlantic sunlight streaming through the tall windows had frozen that moment forever in the memory of all present. No one could know then that this simple act of rebellion would forever change not only Eliza's life, but the lives of all who witnessed that scene. But to understand how they arrived at this moment, we must go back 6 months in time, when Eliza's life was as different as the sea in calm before the storm. The morning light filtered lazily through the blinds of the small apartment in the east side of Providence. Eliza was already awake, as every morning, long before the alarm clock would ring. Her eyes, a deep and intense brown, contemplated the ceiling while her mind went through the list of pending tasks. Since her children, Wren and Phoebe, had left for Boston and New York respectively, the mornings were always the same: silent, organized, methodical. Routine had been her anchor since the divorce. 3 years had passed since Garrett, her husband of 25 years, decided he preferred to restart his life with a woman 20 years younger. The initial pain had given way to resigned acceptance, and finally to a loneliness that, like a silent plant, had put down deep roots in her daily life. Coffee steamed in her mug as Eliza observed from her small balcony the awakening of the neighborhood. Neighbors hung clothes, shopkeepers raised the shutters of their stores, and stray cats stretched lazily under the first rays of sun. "Good morning, Eliza. Already up so early?" The voice of Mrs. Bramley, the elderly woman from the 3rd floor, rose from the street. "As always, Mrs. Bramley, the day is too short for all that needs to be done," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And you're still at that new job in Newport. Is it worth getting up so early?" Eliza nodded. "They pay better than cleaning houses, and the hours are fixed. I can't complain." What she didn't say was that every morning, while traveling on the bus that took her from Providence to Newport, she observed how the landscape gradually changed. Modest buildings gave way to white mansions with perfect gardens, luxury yachts in marinas, cars that cost more than everything she had earned in her life. It was another world, one she accessed each morning with her grey uniform and employee credential, only to return to her reality when the sun set. At 5:15 in the morning, Eliza closed her door and descended the building stairs. The neighborhood still slept, except for the bakers and street cleaners. That limbo between night and day had always seemed special to her, as if the world belonged to her for a few moments. The bus arrived punctually. She sat by the window, as always, and took from her purse the small book of Emily Dickinson poetry that had accompanied her for years. The pages were worn, with annotations in the margins and dried flowers marking her favorite poems. It was one of the few personal objects she had taken when leaving the family home after the divorce. "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul," she murmured to herself as the bus advanced along the highway beside the Atlantic. Upon arriving at the International Convention Center of Newport, an imposing glass and steel structure that reflected the first rays of sun, Eliza automatically adopted the posture she had perfected over the years. Slightly hunched shoulders, lowered gaze, efficient but discreet movements. It was the art of being without being noticed, of doing her work like a shadow that cleaned, organized, and disappeared before the executives and business people arrived at their meetings. "Merit, today there's a special event in the Atlantic Ballroom. The Arabs want everything perfect, you know how they are." Wallace, the center manager, a thin man with a permanent expression of worry, intercepted her as soon as she crossed the service door. "As always, Mr. Wallace, leave it in my hands," she replied professionally. "And please, this time, make sure the bathrooms have those special towels they request, the ones with Egyptian cotton. Last time their absence almost cost me my position." Eliza nodded, aware that Wallace trembled at the mere mention of the Arab investors, especially Karim Al-Mansour, who owned not only 30% of the convention center, but also half of the commercial buildings between Newport and Narragansett. As she meticulously cleaned the Atlantic Ballroom, Eliza observed the details of the decoration being set up. Authentic Persian rugs, Moroccan lamps of gold filigree, floral arrangements where jasmine and orange blossom intertwined, creating a hypnotic fragrance. Everything spoke of a luxury that was as foreign to her as it was fascinating. "Excuse me, I didn't know someone was here." The voice startled her. She turned to find a young Arab woman, dressed with discreet elegance, black pants of impeccable cut, turquoise silk blouse, and a scarf of the same tone framing her face of delicate features. Unlike other Arab women who frequented the center, she didn't wear ostentatious jewelry or excessive makeup. "I'm sorry, I'm just finishing and I'll be out of your way," Eliza responded automatically, lowering her gaze as she had learned to do. "Please don't leave on my account. I just came to check the space before the suppliers arrive." The woman smiled, and there was something in that smile that was unusual, a genuine warmth. "My name is Samira. I'm organizing a series of workshops on female entrepreneurship here." "Eliza Merritt, cleaning service," she introduced herself, surprised that someone would take the trouble to start a conversation with her. "The ballroom will be ready in half an hour." Samira nodded, but instead of leaving, she approached the windows to contemplate the view of the Atlantic that stretched like a blue carpet under the morning sun. "You know, I've always been fascinated by New England. This light doesn't exist anywhere else in the world," Samira commented in a soft voice. "In Dubai, where I live, everything is spectacular, but in a different way. Here there is a beauty that has history, time, soul." Eliza didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to being asked her opinion, least of all on topics like beauty or history. To buy time, she rearranged the chairs in a semicircle, an arrangement that seemed more welcoming to her than the rigid rows that executives usually preferred. "I like how you've placed the chairs," Samira observed. "It creates a different energy, more of dialogue than hierarchy. It's exactly what I'm looking for in these workshops." For the first time in a long time, Eliza felt she was truly seen, not as part of the furniture, but as a person with judgment and presence. "Thank you," she replied simply, but a small seed had been planted inside her, a seed that, without knowing it then, would begin to grow and transform everything. Karim Al-Mansour contemplated Newport from the terrace of his penthouse in the harbor area, a Cuban cigar between his fingers and an expression of calculated satisfaction on his face. At 40, he had built an empire from scratch, expanding from Dubai to the Rhode Island coast, where he had found a paradise of opportunities and few obstacles. The American economic crisis had been his great ally, allowing him to acquire properties at bargain prices and become one of the most influential men in the region in just 5 years. "Tonight's event must be impeccable, Faisal," he said to his assistant, a young Egyptian man in an impeccable suit and alert gaze. "The trade ministers from 3 countries will attend. Any detail out of place is unacceptable." "Everything is under control, sir. I have personally supervised every aspect." "And the guest list? Did the mayor confirm?" "All confirmed, sir, including the ambassador." Karim nodded, satisfied. His phone vibrated with a notification. It was a message from Samira Al-Fahim, the niece of one of his most important partners in Dubai. The young businesswoman was organizing a series of events at the convention center, and although Karim considered her ideas about female entrepreneurship too progressive, he couldn't ignore her because of the family connections she represented. "Samira has requested the Atlantic Ballroom for 3 more weeks. Should I approve the extension?" asked Faisal. Karim frowned. "Doesn't it interfere with the investment summit events?" "No, sir. They would be in the mornings when the ballroom is usually empty." "Approve it then, but remind her that any damage or alteration of the space will be her responsibility. And I want daily reports on what happens in those workshops," he ordered, pronouncing the last word with certain disdain. In his world, women like Samira represented an anomaly, educated in the West, with ideas about equality and empowerment that clashed head-on with his own convictions about the natural order of things. However, Karim was above all a pragmatic man. If keeping Samira happy meant favors from her uncle, Minister Al-Fahim, then he would tolerate her small revolutions as long as they didn't interfere with his business. He descended in his private elevator to the garage, where his driver waited beside the black Bentley. The journey to the convention center would take barely 15 minutes, but Karim took advantage of every second to make calls to his offices in London, Dubai, and Singapore. The world of finance never rested, and he had built his fortune by always staying one step ahead of his competitors. Upon arriving at the center, as always, he was received by Wallace, who practically dissolved into bows. "Mr. Al-Mansour, welcome. Everything is prepared according to your specifications." Karim barely looked at him. His attention was fixed on the preparations for that night's event. He toured the main hall with a critical eye, stopping at every detail: the arrangement of tables, the quality of flowers, the exact temperature at which the champagne would be served. "The curtains are wrong," he declared, pointing to the heavy silk draperies. "They should fall in perfect pleats, not in that disorderly form. Fix it." "Immediately, sir," stammered Wallace, making frantic signals to 2 employees who ran to adjust the curtains. While supervising every aspect of the event, Karim glimpsed a middle-aged woman discreetly cleaning one of the hall's side mirrors. There was something in her way of moving, in the precision of her gestures, that caught his attention for an instant. It wasn't usual for cleaning staff to be present during his inspections. He generally ensured that all that invisible work was done before his arrival. "What is that woman doing here at this hour?" he asked in a cutting tone. Wallace followed his gaze and paled. "It's Eliza, from the cleaning service. She's reinforcing some areas that we noticed needed special attention for tonight. I'll remove her immediately. Make sure that during the event there is no service staff visible unless absolutely necessary. Guests should not be reminded of the machinery that makes this place function." For Karim, the world was clearly divided between visible and invisible people. He had been born on the wrong side of that line, the son of a modest merchant on the outskirts of Riyadh, but had fought relentlessly to cross to the other side. Now that he was firmly established among the privileged, he demanded that the dividing line be kept clear and defined. Service should be perfect but imperceptible, like the air conditioning that maintained the ideal temperature without anyone noticing its existence. What Karim didn't know, while giving orders and demanding perfection with the arrogance that characterized him, was that the woman cleaning the mirror had observed him attentively through the reflection, that her brown eyes, sharp and penetrating, had captured every gesture, every expression, every nuance of his behavior, that in her apparent invisibility, Eliza Merritt saw more than anyone could imagine, and that soon, very soon, their paths would cross in a way neither of them could foresee. The first lights of dawn caressed the white buildings of Newport when Eliza arrived at the convention center, as every morning. But today, something was different. An elegant sign at the entrance of the Atlantic Ballroom announced, "Women's Entrepreneurship Workshop, Building Bridges Between Cultures." The image showed women of different origins sharing a work table, with the discreet signature of the Al-Fahim Foundation in the lower corner. Eliza observed the sign with curiosity while beginning her usual routine. The ballroom had been transformed overnight. Instead of the usual conference tables with rigid chairs, now there were small groups of comfortable seats arranged in circles, creating intimate spaces for conversation. On the walls, photographs of businesswomen from various parts of the world, from a Moroccan baker to the CEO of a Swedish multinational. "Good morning, Eliza." She turned to find Samira, who seemed especially radiant that morning in a lavender suit and silk scarf printed with delicate geometric motifs. "Good morning, Ms. Al-Fahim," she responded formally. "Please call me Samira," the young woman insisted. "What do you think of how the ballroom looks?" Eliza hesitated. She wasn't used to being asked her opinion on these matters. "It's different," she replied cautiously. "It seems like a place where one would want to stay and converse, not just attend a meeting and leave." A smile illuminated Samira's face. "Exactly. That was precisely the intention. We want to create an environment where women feel comfortable sharing experiences, not a cold corporate space." She paused and added, "I was wondering if you would like to attend any of the workshops. They would be from 8 to 10 in the morning before your main work schedule." The proposal took Eliza by surprise. Her attending a workshop for businesswomen? The idea seemed absurd. "I appreciate the invitation, but I don't think it's my place," she responded. "Besides, I have my obligations. I've spoken with Wallace and he agrees to adjust your schedule if you decide to participate," Samira continued. "Today's workshop is about finding opportunities in what you already know how to do. It's not just about big companies, but about how any skill can be turned into your own project." Eliza felt a mixture of curiosity and fear. For decades, she had followed the path that others had traced for her. First her parents, then her husband, finally her circumstances. The idea of making decisions about her professional future seemed as foreign as it was terrifying. "I'll think about it," she finally conceded, more to end the conversation than out of genuine interest. However, as she continued with her tasks that morning, she could hear the voices coming from the Atlantic ballroom. Women of different accents, American, Arab, Latin American, sharing experiences, laughter, ideas. As the hours passed, she found herself working closer and closer to the half-open door, catching fragments of conversations that resonated inside her. "The hardest part was believing I could do it, that I had the right to try. After the divorce, I thought my life was over, but that's when it really began. Nobody valued my experience until I myself learned to value it." Each phrase was like a small crack in the wall that Eliza had built around her own dreams, dreams that she had buried so deeply that she no longer even remembered having had them. During the break, while the participants enjoyed mint tea and traditional sweets on the terrace, Eliza ventured into the empty ballroom with the excuse of collecting some forgotten cups. On the digital board, a phrase stood out in elegant letters. "Your worth is not determined by your work, but by the dignity with which you perform it and the respect you demand while doing it." The words hit her like a forgotten truth. She remembered her grandmother Dorothea, who had worked all her life as a seamstress in Providence, but always with a dignity and pride that imposed respect even among the wealthy ladies for whom she sewed. When had she forgotten that fundamental lesson? "It's beautiful, isn't it?" The voice of an older woman surprised her. It was an elegant lady, about 60 years old, with white hair gathered in an impeccable bun and eyes of an intense blue that contrasted with her olive skin. "I'm Fatima Al-Fahim, Samira's aunt." "Excuse me, I was just collecting," Eliza began, embarrassed. "Don't apologize for reading, dear. The words are there for everyone." Fatima smiled warmly. "Samira has told me about you. She says you have a special intelligence in your eyes, a way of observing that reveals more than what you say." Eliza didn't know how to respond to that unexpected comment. "You know, I started like you," Fatima continued, "cleaning houses in Abu Dhabi when I was young. Now I run a foundation that helps women find their professional path. It's not titles that define our potential, but our capacity to see opportunities where others see obstacles." Something in Fatima's sincerity melted Eliza's defenses. "Sometimes I feel it's too late for me," she confessed in a low voice. "I'm 52. My children are already adults. My whole life has been taking care of others, cleaning spaces that don't belong to me. Fatima nodded understandingly. And do you know how old I was when I began my foundation? 55. After raising 4 children and burying my husband. She took Eliza's hands in hers. It's never too late to recognize your own worth. At our age, we have something young women don't possess: wisdom. And that, dear, is an incalculable treasure in today's world. The rest of the day, Eliza worked with renewed energy, a pleasant restlessness that she hadn't felt in years. Fatima's words had touched something deep inside her, as if they had opened a door she believed forever closed. That night, upon returning to her small apartment in Providence, she did something she hadn't done in a long time. She took out a new notebook and began to write. They weren't grand plans or excessive ambitions, but small ideas, observations about the details she had noticed in the convention center, reflections on what she had heard in the workshop. She couldn't imagine then that this simple act of writing down her thoughts would be the first step toward a completely new path, nor that this path would lead her, inevitably, to a confrontation with the man who considered the convention center his personal kingdom. Meanwhile, a few miles away in his mansion by the sea, Karim Al-Mansour reviewed the reports on the activities in the center. The name of Samira's workshop appeared on his screen, along with a list of participants. His gaze briefly stopped on a notation. Center staff interested in participating. Eliza Merritt, cleaning service. He frowned, not understanding why that insignificant detail had caught his attention, and continued reviewing contracts and financial projections until late into the night. 3 weeks passed since that first workshop, and Eliza was no longer the same woman. The change was subtle but undeniable. She walked more erect, looked people in the eye when speaking, and above all had recovered a voice that had been silenced for years. Each morning, before starting her usual shift, she attended Samira's workshops, where she had gradually gone from being a silent listener to an active participant. That morning, while sharing with the group an idea for a small traditional New England food service for events, she didn't notice that Karim Al-Mansour had stopped at the half-open door of the ballroom. He had arrived early for a meeting, and attracted by the animated voices, had approached out of curiosity. What he saw disconcerted him. Women of different ages and origins conversing with enthusiasm, and among them that cleaning employee speaking with a confidence that seemed to him completely inappropriate for her position. "My grandmother prepared a clam chowder that would make you weep with pleasure," Eliza was explaining with passion. "I have all her recipes saved, adapted to modern ingredients but maintaining that essence that only experienced hands know how to give." "That's exactly what we're looking for, Eliza," Samira was responding. "Products and services with soul, with history behind them. Luxury tourists are tired of homogenization. They seek authenticity, connection with the local culture." Karim withdrew silently, but the scene remained etched in his mind as something disturbing. It wasn't so much what he had seen, but the feeling it had provoked in him, as if a natural order was being altered. In his vision of the world, each person had an assigned place, and seeing that servicewoman speaking as an equal with businesswomen educated at the best international universities was unsettling. That same afternoon, he called Wallace to his office. "I've noticed that some employees are participating in Miss Falfahim's workshops," he commented in a casual tone that didn't fool the nervous manager. "Yes, Mr. Al-Mansour. Miss Samira specifically requested that interested staff could attend as long as it didn't interfere with their duties. We've adjusted schedules to—" "And who cleans while they're busy playing at being businesswomen?" interrupted Karim, his voice acquiring a dangerous edge. Wallace swallowed. "All the work is performed according to the usual standards, sir. No one has neglected their functions. I think we're confusing the staff, Wallace, giving them ideas that don't correspond to their capacity. When Ms. Al-Fahim's program ends, I want things to return to normal. Understood?" "Of course, sir." However, what Karim didn't understand was that some transformations, once initiated, cannot be stopped simply with orders. The seed planted in Eliza's heart had germinated and put down deep roots. That weekend, for the first time in 3 years, Eliza invited her daughters to eat at her small apartment. Wren, the eldest, a literature professor in Boston, and Phoebe, a nurse in New York, immediately noticed the change in their mother. "Mom, you look different," exclaimed Phoebe while helping set the table. "There's something about you, I don't know, like a new light." Eliza smiled as she served the seafood stew she had prepared with such care. "I'm participating in some workshops at the center where I work, on female entrepreneurship." Wren raised her eyebrows, surprised. "Entrepreneurship? You? And why not?" Eliza responded with a confidence that surprised her daughters. "I have ideas, experience, knowledge. The only thing I was missing was believing I could do something with all that." During the meal, she told them about the project she was developing, a catering service specializing in traditional New England recipes focused on small and personalized events. She would use her grandmother Dorothea's recipes, adapted for international palates, but maintaining the essence of authentic Rhode Island cuisine. "I'll call it Dorothea's flavors, in honor of Grandma," she explained with enthusiasm. "I'll start little by little with small events on weekends, while I keep my job at the center." Her daughters looked at her in amazement. Where was the resigned woman who had remained after the divorce? The one who seemed to have accepted that her life would have no more exciting chapters. "Mum, this is wonderful," said Wren, taking her hand across the table. "But where will you get the money to start?" "The Al-Fahim Foundation offers microloans for selected projects, and Samira has helped me prepare my presentation. It will be next week, before a committee." Phoebe, always the most practical one, had concerns. "What if it doesn't work? What if it's too much stress along with your current job?" Eliza smiled with a new serenity. "Daughter, the worst that can happen is that I return exactly to where I am now, but if it works, I'll have something that is completely mine. Something I built with my own hands, not the remains of the life someone else decided to abandon." That night, after saying goodbye to her daughters, Eliza sat on her small balcony, contemplating the lights of Providence. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't seem like a threatening territory, but a blank canvas, full of possibilities. She knew there would be obstacles, that many would underestimate her or doubt her capacity. But something fundamental had changed within her. She no longer sought external approval to validate her worth. What Eliza couldn't imagine was that the first major obstacle would have a name and surname, Karim Al-Mansour, and that their encounter would not be a simple collision of personalities, but a clash between two completely opposite visions of the world and of human dignity. The big day of the presentation had arrived. In the Newport Hall of the Convention Center, 10 selected women would present their projects before the committee of the Al-Fahim Foundation. Eliza had rehearsed for days, polishing every word of her presentation with the help of Samira, who saw in Dorothea's flavors not only a viable project, but a story of personal overcoming that perfectly embodied the Foundation's mission. Dressed in a simple navy blue suit that she had bought especially for the occasion, Eliza waited her turn while observing the presentations of the other candidates. There were young businesswomen with revolutionary technological ideas, traditional artisans seeking to modernize their businesses, even an architect proposing sustainable housing inspired by coastal New England architecture. "Nervous?" asked Fatima, sitting beside her. "Like never before in my life," Eliza confessed with a tense smile. "It's normal, but remember, you're not asking for a favor. You're offering an investment opportunity in a valuable project." Fatima gently squeezed her hand. "Besides, your presentation is one of the most solid. You have real experience, not just theory." When she finally heard her name, Eliza advanced to the podium with steps that tried to appear more confident than she felt. In front of her 5 judges, Fatima, 2 veteran businesswomen from the United Arab Emirates, an international chef specializing in Atlantic fusion cuisine, and, to her surprise, Karim Al-Mansour, who apparently represented the investors associated with the foundation. "Good morning," she began with a clear but trembling voice. "My name is Eliza Merritt. I'm 52 years old and I'm here to present Dorothea's Flavors, a catering service specializing in high-end traditional New England cuisine for exclusive events." As she advanced in her presentation, showing photographs of her dishes, explaining her business plan and sharing the family recipes that constituted her greatest treasure, her voice gained strength and conviction. She spoke of her grandmother Dorothea, of the cracked hands that kneaded bread with the same delicacy with which they embroidered lace for church ceremonies. She spoke of the dignity of work well done, of authenticity as a supreme value in an increasingly homogenized world. "I don't just offer food," she concluded with passion. "I offer stories that can be tasted, traditions that stay alive through recipes transmitted by generations of women who, like my grandmother, perhaps could never formally undertake business, but were entrepreneurs in their kitchens, innovators in their recipes, brave in their determination to preserve our culture through flavors." When she finished, there was a moment of silence followed by warm applause. All the judges were smiling except Karim, whose face remained impassive, evaluating her with a gaze that Eliza couldn't interpret. "I have a question, Mrs. Merritt," Karim finally said, with a tone that mixed formal courtesy and something darker lurking beneath the surface. "You currently work in the cleaning service of this center, correct?" "That's right, Mr. Al-Mansour," she responded with dignity. "And how do you plan to reconcile both activities? Aren't you afraid that the quality of your current work will be compromised by these culinary ambitions?" There was something in the way he pronounced ambitions that sounded as if it were a dirty word, inappropriate for someone of her position. Eliza felt a pang of indignation but remained serene. "During the initial phase, Dorothea's flavors will operate only on weekends and on my days off. It will not affect my professional performance at the center at all." She paused and added, "Besides, I firmly believe that when a person feels fulfilled in one aspect of their life, that is positively reflected in all their activities. My work here can only benefit from my personal and professional growth in other areas." Karim nodded slowly, as if considering her words, but his eyes revealed he wasn't convinced. "One last question. What makes you think that people accustomed to international chefs with Michelin stars will want to try dishes prepared by someone with your experience?" The silence that followed was tense. Fatima frowned, clearly displeased by the question, but before she could intervene, Eliza responded, "Mr. Al-Mansour, Michelin stars recognize excellence, not social exclusivity. My experience comes from generations of women who cooked with love and dedication. True connoisseurs seek authenticity and passion, not just credentials. If you give me the opportunity, I'll demonstrate that true excellence doesn't discriminate by origin, only by results." Karim's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded and asked no more questions. The rest of the panel compensated for the tension with enthusiastic questions about the menus, logistics, and growth projections. Upon finishing the session, Samira approached Eliza with a radiant smile. "You were magnificent. Your final answer, perfect. You showed dignity without aggressiveness, conviction without arrogance." "Thank you, but I think I've made a mistake," Eliza responded, still trembling from the adrenaline. "I shouldn't have challenged Mr. Al-Mansour like that. He's a powerful man here. Sometimes, Eliza, we need to remind the powerful that power is not equivalent to reason." Samira took her by the arm. "Come, let's celebrate with tea. The results will be announced tomorrow, but I have a good feeling." What neither of them saw was Karim's expression as he watched them walk away. It wasn't exactly anger, but something more complex. A mixture of irritation, curiosity, and a deep perplexity at something that didn't fit into his ordered vision of the world. That night, in the solitude of his mansion, while reviewing the files of the projects presented, Karim lingered longer than necessary on Eliza's. There was something about that woman that defied his usual categories. It wasn't just that she had answered his question with unexpected dignity. It was that she had done so without fear, without the deference he was accustomed to receiving. As if, somehow, she didn't recognize the hierarchy that for him was so evident and natural. When the time came to vote on the projects that would receive funding, Karim made a decision that surprised even himself. The news arrived like a ray of sunlight through storm clouds. Dorothea's Flavors had been one of the 5 projects selected to receive funding from the Al-Fahim Foundation. Eliza received the notification while cleaning one of the conference rooms and had to sit down to assimilate what she had just read. It was real. She would receive $15,000 to start her business, plus personalized mentoring for a year. The most surprising thing, according to what Samira later confided, was that Karim Al-Mansour had voted in favor of her project. "He said your proposal was the most authentic and based on real experience," she explained, as surprised as Eliza herself. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Eliza maintained her job at the convention center during the week, but the weekends transformed into a culinary adventure. With the help of her daughters, who traveled to Providence when they could. She conditioned the kitchen of her small apartment to comply with all professional sanitary regulations. She designed menus, sought local suppliers of traditional products, created a visual identity that honored her grandmother's legacy with a logo that reproduced the characteristic embroidery of Rhode Island lace. Her first event was a small cocktail for 15 people, the celebration of Fatima's birthday in a villa facing the sea. The menu included refined versions of traditional dishes: clam chowder served in small artisanal ceramic spoons, fried clams with light tempura, lobster rolls on a bed of sea salt infused with Atlantic herbs. Each bite told a story. Each dish was a connection with the land and the New England culture. The success was resounding. The guests, international business people accustomed to luxury restaurants around the world, marveled at the authenticity and love that was perceived in each preparation. An editor of a gastronomy magazine present at the event asked her for an interview, and before the night ended, Eliza had received requests for 3 more private events. "Do you see what happens when you allow yourself to shine with your own light?" Fatima told her as the last guests were leaving. "This is just the beginning, Eliza. Your talent deserves to be recognized." However, not everything was celebration. As Dorothea's flavors gained renown among a select circle of connoisseurs, Eliza's position at the convention center became increasingly complicated. Wallace, always nervous about any change, began to assign her more demanding tasks, as if wanting to prove she couldn't handle both responsibilities. "Mr. Al-Mansour specifically asked if your work was still impeccable," he commented one day, nervously adjusting his tie. He said he would be attentive to any sign of neglect. Eliza understood the message. Despite having supported her project, Karim was waiting for her to fail, to demonstrate that she couldn't aspire to more without sacrificing what she already had. It was a silent challenge, and she was determined to overcome it. She doubled her efforts, arriving even earlier at the center, organizing her time with military precision. She would not give anyone reasons to question her professionalism, neither in cleaning nor in cooking. The turning point came 2 months later, during an important international congress of real estate investors. The center buzzed with activity, with delegations from around the world gathered to discuss the future of the luxury market in the Atlantic region. Karim Al-Mansour was one of the central figures of the event, presenting his vision for a new residential and commercial complex that would transform the coast between Newport and Narragansett. The night before the main presentation, while Eliza was finishing cleaning one of the auxiliary rooms, she heard angry voices coming from a nearby office. She immediately recognized Karim's voice, raised in a tone that few people dared to use with him. "It's unacceptable, Samira. You can't change the hiring policy without consulting me. This center has standards." "Those standards are precisely the problem, Karim." Samira's voice sounded equally firm. "We can't talk about sustainable development while we exploit local workers with precarious contracts. The Al-Fahim Foundation will not associate its name with labor practices of the last century. The foundation is a guest here. It will not dictate policies in my company. A company that is receiving preferential financing thanks to our contacts. Don't forget that the minister is observing how you treat this partnership." Eliza knew she shouldn't be listening, but something kept her rooted to the spot. The conflict between Karim and Samira seemed to represent something larger than their personalities or immediate interests. It was a clash between 2 visions of how the business world should function. "Your Western ideas are contaminating traditional values, Samira. You confuse people like that cleaner, making her believe she can be something she is not." "You mean Eliza? Her business has already secured prestigious clients, including the ambassador. Her success proves exactly what I'm trying to demonstrate to you. Talent exists at all levels. It just needs opportunity. Her success is a novelty, a temporary curiosity. When the fashion for the folkloric passes, she will return to cleaning floors, which is what she's really prepared for." The contempt in his voice was so palpable that Eliza felt as if she had been slapped. She silently backed away, her heart hammering in her chest and a mixture of humiliation and anger growing inside her. That night in her apartment, she couldn't sleep. Karim's words resonated in her mind, reaffirming all the fears she had tried to overcome in recent months. What if he was right? What if everything she had achieved was just a temporary illusion, a charitable concession that didn't reflect her true worth? But alongside these doubts, something else emerged. An iron determination. If Karim al-Mansour believed she should return to her place, he would have to prove to her that this place was exactly where she decided it was. Not out of arrogance or rebellion, but out of respect for herself and for all women like her grandmother, who never had the opportunity to demonstrate all they could be. The next morning, when she arrived at the convention center, something had changed in her. Her step was firmer, her gaze more direct. She performed her duties with the same efficiency as always, but no longer shrank when executives passed by without looking at her, no longer lowered her eyes when Karim passed surrounded by his entourage of assistants. What she didn't know was that the storm brewing between Samira and Karim was about to break, and that she would find herself, unwittingly, in the eye of the hurricane. The day of the grand event had arrived. The main ballroom of the convention center gleamed under strategically placed lights to highlight architectural models and informational panels about Karim al-Mansour's ambitious real estate project. Local politicians, international investors, and specialized media mingled in an atmosphere of expectation. Eliza worked discreetly, ensuring everything was impeccable. Dressed in her grey uniform, she moved among the guests like a shadow, collecting empty glasses, adjusting flowers, maintaining order without being noticed. It was a role she had perfected over the years, but which she now performed with a different awareness. It was no longer imposed invisibility, but a strategic choice. She observed, learned, understood the power dynamics unfolding before her. Near the main podium, Karim conversed with the mayor of Newport and two Saudi businessmen. His ivory Italian suit, custom-made, contrasted with his tanned skin and perfectly trimmed beard. Everything about him exuded power and control. The Atlantic Vista project will revolutionize the concept of sustainable luxury, he explained, with the confidence of someone who has never been contradicted. Imagine ultra-luxury residences that integrate perfectly with the natural landscape, using local materials and cutting-edge technologies to minimize environmental impact. It sounds impressive, Al-Mansour, the mayor responded. But environmental groups are already protesting. They say it will destroy one of the last unspoiled stretches of coastline. Karim made a dismissive gesture. There is always resistance to progress. We will offer them compensation, perhaps a nature reserve area as part of the complex. In the end, everyone wins. The local economy, investors, even the environment when properly managed. Eliza passed near the group, collecting an abandoned glass on a brochure. She didn't intend to listen, but Karim's words about compensation reminded her disturbingly of the unequal negotiations she had witnessed all her life. The powerful deciding the fate of the weak, offering crumbs presented as generosity. On the other side of the ballroom, Samira and Fatima conversed with several journalists. Unlike Karim's exuberant promises, they spoke of concrete foundation projects, microloans for women entrepreneurs, professional training, initiatives to preserve traditional New England crafts. Eliza noticed the tension in the air, like two opposing forces occupying the same space. Karim's vision centered on spectacular luxury and immediate profitability, and Samira's focused on long-term sustainable development and positive social impact. The moment of the formal presentation was approaching. Guests were taking their seats as Karim prepared to take the stage. It was then that Samira approached him, exchanging words that Eliza, from her position, couldn't hear. But Karim's expression visibly changed. His confident smile transformed into a tense line. Something was happening behind the scenes, something that threatened to derail the carefully orchestrated event. Eliza continued with her duties, but kept a watchful eye on the proceedings. Karim finally took the podium. He began his presentation with the ease of someone accustomed to commanding everyone's attention, displaying impressive images of the future complex on giant screens. But as he progressed, Eliza noticed subtle signs of tension, a slight tremor in his voice, drops of sweat on his forehead despite the air conditioning. As you can see, Karim continued, pointing to an aerial image of the project, respect for local culture and New England traditions is fundamental to our vision. We want to create a space that honors the spirit of this land while projecting it towards a prosperous future. It was at that moment that a woman stood up among the audience. It was Catherine Thornton, a renowned local activist for cultural heritage preservation, whom Eliza knew by sight from her frequent appearances in the Rhode Island press. "Mr. Al-Mansour," she said in a clear voice that resonated throughout the ballroom, "how do you explain then that your company has cancelled contracts with local artisans in your hotels, replacing them with imported industrial replicas? Is this how you honor our traditions?" A murmur ran through the room. Karim visibly paled but quickly regained his composure. "I appreciate your question, Mrs. Thornton. There were temporary adjustments in our supply chain due to quality issues, but we are committed to local artisans. In fact, we have plans to create a craft center within the new complex. May I show you the emails where your purchasing director explicitly orders the replacement of artisanal products with cheaper imitations, citing the ignorance of tourists to notice the difference?" insisted Catherine, taking out her phone. The murmur intensified. The journalists present leaned forward in their seats, suddenly more interested. Karim shot a furious look at Samira, as if blaming her for this interruption. Eliza then understood. Samira had provided information to Catherine, deliberately creating this moment of public confrontation. "This is not the appropriate forum to discuss operational details," Karim responded coldly. "I would be delighted to schedule a meeting with representatives of the artisanal sector to address any concerns." He tried to continue his presentation, but the damage was done. The carefully constructed narrative about his respect for local culture had been publicly questioned. The journalists were already typing on their devices, probably modifying the articles they would publish the next day. When he finally finished the presentation, the applause was polite but notably less enthusiastic than expected. Karim descended from the stage with a forced smile and headed directly towards Samira. Eliza, who was cleaning a nearby table, could hear the exchange. "This is your doing, isn't it?" His voice was a furious whisper. "Do you realize what you've done? You've sabotaged a $300 million project with your romantic ideas about artisans and traditions." Samira maintained her composure. "I haven't sabotaged anything, Karim. I've only helped the truth come to light. If your project can't withstand honest questions, perhaps you should reconsider its foundations. This won't stand. Your foundation, your programs, everything depends on relationships that I have cultivated for years. One message from me to the minister. Are you threatening me? Here, in front of all these witnesses?" Samira smiled with a tranquility that contrasted with Karim's barely contained fury. "I think we both know who has more to lose if this conversation continues." Eliza discreetly moved away, aware of having witnessed something she shouldn't have. But the implications of what she had just heard deeply disturbed her. The conflict between Karim and Samira had clearly escalated to a dangerous level, and she, without wanting to, was connected to both sides. Employee of one, protégé of the other. What she couldn't imagine was how personal this conflict would become, nor that she would soon find herself at its epicenter, forced to make a decision that would change the course of all their lives. The days following the event were tense at the convention center. The news about the public confrontation had leaked to the local press, and several newspapers published articles questioning the authenticity of Al-Mansour's commitment to New England culture. It wasn't a major scandal, but it constituted a stain on the meticulously cultivated image of the Arab businessman. Karim hardly appeared at the center, busy in emergency meetings with investors and politicians to assure them that the project was moving forward without modifications. But his physical absence did not diminish the pressure that Eliza and other employees felt. Wallace had become almost paranoid, demanding impossible standards of perfection, as if fearing that the slightest error could trigger his boss's anger. "Merritt, I need you to stay late today," he informed her one afternoon as she was finishing her shift. "A last-minute event has come up. A private dinner for Mr. Al-Mansour and some key investors. He wants to demonstrate to them that everything is proceeding as planned." Eliza felt a knot in her stomach. She had planned to meet that night with an important potential client for Dorothea's Flavors, a British diplomat celebrating his wedding anniversary, who wanted a traditional New England menu. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wallace, but I have an unavoidable personal commitment tonight," she responded with firmness but respect. The manager looked at her as if she had just proposed burning down the building. "A personal commitment? Eliza, this is not a request. Mr. Al-Mansour specifically asked who would be in charge of cleaning tonight. He asked for me in particular." This surprised Eliza. Karim had never been interested in which specific employee performed each task. Yes, he said he wanted trusted staff for this event. Those are his words, not mine. The implication was clear. After the incident with Samira, Karim wanted to surround himself only with employees who weren't connected to her or the foundation, people who owed loyalty exclusively to him. Eliza found herself at a crossroads. Cancelling with the diplomat could mean losing a crucial opportunity for her emerging business. But refusing Karim's request, especially in this moment of tension, could cost her her main job. "Give me a moment to make a call, please," she finally requested. She withdrew to a quiet corner and called the diplomat, explaining the situation. To her relief, he was understanding, and they agreed to reschedule for the weekend. Still, the incident left a bitter taste in Eliza's mouth. It was becoming increasingly difficult to keep these two parts of her life separate, as if the universe were forcing her to choose an identity, the obedient employee or the independent businesswoman. That night, while preparing the ballroom for dinner, Eliza felt a growing unease. The space had been decorated with exaggerated luxury, silver candelabras, imported orchids, French porcelain tableware. Everything screamed opulence, as if Karim needed to reaffirm his position and power before his guests. When she finished the preparations, she was about to discreetly withdraw to the service area when Karim entered the ballroom. He was alone, inspecting every detail with a critical eye. Upon seeing her, he stopped. "Merit," he said in a neutral tone that revealed none of his thoughts. "Everything seems in order." "Thank you, Mr. Al-Mansour," she responded, maintaining professionalism. "If you don't need anything else, I'll withdraw so you can receive your guests." But instead of dismissing her with a gesture as he usually did, Karim studied her with a new curiosity. "Your other project," he finally said. "I've heard it's having some success." Eliza tensed. She hadn't expected him to mention Dorothea's flavors directly. "It's going well, yes. Thank you for your support on the selection committee." An enigmatic smile formed on Karim's lips. "Do you know why I voted in favor of your project, Merit?" She shook her head, genuinely intrigued. "Because I was sure you would fail," he responded with brutal frankness. "I wanted Samira and her foundation to see the limits of their romantic ideas about the hidden potential of people like you." The words hit Eliza like stones, but she remained firm, not letting her expression reveal the impact. "I'm sorry to have disappointed you with my success, then," she responded with dignity. Karim let out a brief laugh, without humor. "You haven't disappointed me yet, because you haven't had real success. What you have is a novelty, a whim of the elite seeking authentic experiences for a time. But when the fashion passes, who will you be? You will still be the woman who cleans these floors." Eliza felt something ignite inside her, a flare of pure indignation that threatened to consume years of caution and deference. "With all due respect, Mr. Al-Mansour, you don't know who I am. You never have, because you've never bothered to look beyond this uniform." Karim's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Careful, Merit. It seems you've forgotten your place in this center." "My place is not determined by you, but by my work and my dignity," she responded, surprising herself with her courage. "The same work that I will perform now, withdrawing so you can receive your guests." With a formal nod of her head, Eliza headed toward the service door. She could feel Karim's eyes fixed on her back, but she didn't look back. Something fundamental had changed between them. He had really seen her for the first time, and she had spoken with her true voice. What neither of them could know then was that this brief exchange was only the prelude to a much greater confrontation that was approaching. A confrontation that would culminate inevitably with a bucket of ice water and an absolute silence in the most luxurious ballroom of Newport. The following days passed in a tense calm, like the silence that precedes the storm. Eliza continued with her usual tasks at the center, but was aware that something had fundamentally changed. The furtive glances of her colleagues, the whispers that ceased when she approached. Everything indicated that her confrontation with Karim had not gone unnoticed. One morning, while cleaning the staff changing rooms, Lorna, a waitress who had been at the center for years, approached her with a worried expression. "Be careful, Eliza," she warned in a low voice. "Wallace has been asking questions about you, about your other job. It seems someone wants to find a reason to fire you." "Karim?" asked Eliza, though she already knew the answer. Lorna nodded. I don't know what happened between you two, but I've never seen him so obsessed with an employee. Normally he doesn't even remember our names. The news was disturbing but not surprising. Eliza had crossed an invisible line, challenging not just Karim's authority, but his entire vision of the social order. It was the type of transgression that men like him couldn't leave unanswered. That weekend, Dorothea's Flavors Catering had its most important event to date, a dinner for 30 people at the residence of the British ambassador. Eliza had spent weeks perfecting the menu, a celebration of New England cuisine with contemporary touches that marveled the guests. The success was such that, before the night ended, she had received requests for 3 more diplomatic events. "You should consider leaving your other job and dedicating yourself to this full-time," the ambassador suggested as they said goodbye. "You have an extraordinary talent, Eliza. Don't waste your gift on tasks that don't value you." The words resonated within her for days. Was she ready to take that leap? Financially, she still needed the security of her job at the center. Dorothea's Flavors was growing, but remained an incipient business with irregular income. And there was something else, something she couldn't fully express, a resistance to being expelled from a job that, despite everything, she had performed with pride and dedication for years. The following Wednesday, Samira invited her for coffee after her shift. They met at a small cafe far from the center, where no one could recognize them together. "I've heard worrying rumors, Eliza," Samira said without preamble. "Karim is actively looking for reasons to terminate your contract." "I know, I had already been warned." Samira observed her attentively. "Why do you think he's so determined? He's fired people before, but never in such a personal way." Eliza pondered her response, pensively stirring her coffee with cinnamon. "I think I represent something that challenges his vision of the world," she finally responded. "For men like him, people occupy fixed boxes, the powerful and the subordinates, those who give orders and those who obey. When someone like me, a middle-aged woman divorced without formal education, demonstrates that she can be more than what he decided she should be, it's as if she threatens his entire belief system." Samira nodded slowly. "That's exactly it. It's not just about you, Eliza. It's about what you represent, the possibility that the hierarchical order he so values is neither natural nor inevitable. And what should I do? Resign before he fires me? That depends on you. I can offer you a position in the foundation. We need someone to coordinate our traditional gastronomy programs. It would be a full-time job with a decent salary." The offer was tempting, an elegant exit from the increasingly untenable situation at the center, but Eliza felt that accepting it would somehow be giving Karim exactly what he wanted: her departure, her surrender. "I need to think about it," she responded honestly. "I deeply appreciate your offer, Samira, but there's something inside me that resists being expelled from a job I've performed with dignity for years, just because I make a powerful man uncomfortable." Samira smiled, an expression that mixed admiration and concern. "I understand you perfectly. Just remember that you're not alone in this. Many of us are observing and supporting you, even if it can't always be in a visible way." That night in her apartment, Eliza received an unexpected call. It was Wren, her eldest daughter, who rarely called during the week due to her busy classes at Boston University. "Mom, are you sitting down?" Her voice sounded excited. "They've published an article about you and Dorothea's Flavors in Gourmand magazine. I'm sending you the link right now." Indeed, the prestigious gastronomic magazine had included a report titled "The Rebirth of Traditional New England Cuisine: Authenticity as New Luxury." The article highlighted Eliza's personal story, presenting her as an inspiring example of professional reinvention in maturity. "Your mother has discovered that true innovation is in honoring roots," read the journalist, quoting the words of a Michelin-starred chef who had tried her dishes. In an era of fusions and experiments, Eliza Merritt reminds us that authenticity is the most exclusive luxury, impossible to falsify or industrially reproduce. The irony didn't escape Eliza. The article, without intending to, touched exactly on the point of conflict between Karim and Samira, the tension between unbridled modernization and the preservation of authentic traditions. And she, somehow, had become a symbol of that battle. She knew the article would inevitably reach Karim's hands. How would he react to seeing that the employee he had underestimated was receiving public recognition, precisely for values that contradicted his mercantile vision of culture? The answer wasn't long in coming. The next morning, as soon as she crossed the doors of the center, Wallace intercepted her with a grave expression. "Mr. Al-Mansour wants to see you in his office." Immediately, the moment of truth had arrived. As she rode in the elevator to the top floor, where Karim had his private office, Eliza felt a strange calm. She no longer feared what might happen. Whatever the outcome of this conversation, she had recovered something infinitely more valuable than a job: her voice, her dignity, her right to define her own worth. Karim Al-Mansour's office occupied the entire north corner of the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Atlantic coast. The space was decorated with minimalist elegance: Italian designer furniture, contemporary Arabic art, and an imposing black marble table that served as a desk. It was an environment designed to intimidate, to remind each visitor exactly who controlled the power in that room. Eliza entered with a firm step, aware that her grey uniform dramatically contrasted with the luxury surrounding her. Karim was standing by the window, contemplating the sea. He didn't immediately turn to acknowledge her presence, a small act of power that she recognized as such. "Mr. Al-Mansour," she said, breaking the silence, "I was told you wanted to see me." He turned slowly. In his hand, he held Gourmand magazine, open to the article about Dorothea's flavors. His expression was inscrutable, a perfect mask of control. "Interesting reading, Merritt," he commented, placing the magazine on his desk. "It seems you found influential admirers." "The article was a surprise to me as well," she responded with sincerity. Karim studied her for a moment, like evaluating a chess piece whose movement he hadn't correctly anticipated. "Tell me something, Merritt. How is it possible that a cleaning employee, without formal culinary training, without connections in high society, has achieved so much recognition in such a short time?" The question contained an implicit accusation that Eliza immediately caught. "Through hard work, Mr. Al-Mansour, with knowledge transmitted by generations of women in my family. And yes, with the opportunity that the Al-Fahim Foundation provided me." She paused before adding, "and with your vote on the committee, for which I remain grateful, regardless of your motivations." A flash of surprise crossed Karim's face at this direct reference to his earlier confession. "Your loyalty is clearly with Samira and her foundation," he said, a steel edge in his voice. "Which leads me to wonder if I can trust you for important events at this center." "My loyalty is to my work, sir, in any area where I perform it," Eliza responded. "I have never mixed my responsibilities nor failed to fulfill my obligations here. However, you have been absent at key moments, cancelling shifts to attend to your gastronomic clients, always with prior authorization and compensating the hours at other times," she specified. As Wallace's records show, Karim made a dismissive gesture, as if the technical details weren't important. "The point is, Merritt, that you are no longer completely dedicated to this center. Your mind is divided, your ambitions have deviated, and that's a problem for me." Eliza then understood that this conversation wasn't really about her job performance. It was about control, about keeping each person in the place Karim considered appropriate. "Are you suggesting I must choose between my two jobs?" she asked directly. "I'm saying you've already chosen," he responded. "This article," he pointed to the magazine, "demonstrates where your heart is now. And in my experience, when an employee's heart is no longer in their job, it's better for everyone to end the relationship." He was firing her, but in a way that invited her to voluntarily resign. A friendly agreement that would avoid potential legal complications for him. Eliza took a deep breath. For a second, she considered accepting the exit he was offering. After all, she had Samira's offer, and Dorothea's flavors was growing. Perhaps it was time to focus exclusively on her new path. But something inside her rebelled against this conclusion. It wasn't just pride, but a deep sense of justice, of dignity. "With all due respect, Mr. Al-Mansour, I see no conflict between my two occupations. My work here remains impeccable, as Wallace's evaluations can confirm. If you decide to dispense with my services, it will have to be for objective, documented reasons, not for assumptions about where my heart is." Karim's eyes narrowed. He wasn't accustomed to his invitations being rejected. "Are you challenging me, Merritt?" I'm defending my right to develop professionally without that affecting my commitment to this center, she responded firmly. Unless there is some written policy that prohibits employees from having other professional projects, I see no basis for this conversation. A tense silence settled between them. Karim seemed to be recalculating his strategy, weighing the risks of a dismissal that could be interpreted as retaliation against an employee whose only crime was having success in a project supported by the Al Fahim Foundation. "Very well," he finally said, his voice cold as ice. "You will continue in your position for now. But I warn you, Merritt, I will be watching every detail of your performance. The slightest failure, the smallest error, and you'll have to look for another place to clean." It was a barely veiled threat, but Eliza didn't let herself be intimidated. "As always, I will strive to maintain the highest standards," she responded with dignity. "Do you need anything else from me, Mr. Al Mansour? You may withdraw." With a formal nod of her head, Eliza left the office. Her heart beat rapidly, but not from fear, but from a strange exultation. She had just confronted the most powerful man in the center, perhaps in all of Newport, and had maintained her position. As she descended in the elevator, she understood that this small personal victory would likely have consequences. Karim was not the type of man who easily accepted resistance to his will. The battle was just beginning. What she couldn't imagine was that the culminating point of this conflict would arrive much sooner than she expected, in the middle of one of the most prestigious events of the year, with 200 witnesses observing the moment when a simple bucket of water would forever change the balance of power at the International Convention Center of Newport. The week following the encounter in Karim's office passed in almost unbearable tension. As he had promised, he seemed to be everywhere at once, personally supervising areas he normally delegated to Wallace, unexpectedly appearing in hallways where Eliza was working, inspecting with a critical eye every surface she had just cleaned. "It's not normal," commented Lorna during a break in the staff room. "I've never seen him so attentive to cleaning details. It's as if he's waiting for you to make a mistake." "Not just waiting," responded Eliza. "Hoping for it." Despite the pressure, Eliza remained firm, performing her work with the same dedication as always, but now with a different awareness. Each gesture, each task completed to perfection was an act of silent resistance, a demonstration that her dignity could not be undermined by intimidation. Meanwhile, Dorothea's flavors continued to prosper. The article in Gourmand had attracted clients from all over Rhode Island, and she even received inquiries from international tourists who wanted to experience authentic New England cuisine during their visit. Eliza hired 2 part-time assistants, neighbors from her area who needed work and had experience in traditional cooking. The decisive moment came with the announcement of the annual charity event organized by the Arab business community, a gala to raise funds for educational projects in disadvantaged areas of both New England and the Middle East. It was the most prestigious social event of the season, with attendance by politicians, celebrities, diplomats, and, of course, the most influential business people in the region. As was tradition, the convention center would be transformed into an oasis of Eastern luxury fused with New England elements: Moroccan lamps, Persian tapestries, the aroma of North African spices mixed with local herbs from the gardens. Karim, as one of the main organizers, had given meticulous instructions on every detail. 3 days before the event, Eliza received surprising news. Dorothea's flavors had been selected to provide the traditional New England appetizers that would be served alongside the Arab dishes from the main caterer. "Who exactly hired us?" she asked Samira, immediately suspecting some maneuver in the complicated power game developing around her. "The organizing committee, of which I am a part," responded Samira. "It was a majority vote. Karim opposed it, of course, but he was in the minority. Aren't you worried this will worsen the conflict?" Eliza couldn't avoid feeling manipulated, like a pawn in a game she hadn't chosen to play. Samira observed her with a mixture of understanding and determination. "Eliza, this conflict isn't about you, even though you find yourself in the middle of it. It's about 2 different visions of the world, one based on rigid hierarchies where power flows only from top to bottom, and another that recognizes talent and dignity at all levels. Your catering was selected on its merits, not to provoke Karim." Although not completely convinced, Eliza accepted the commission. It would be, by far, her most ambitious project to date. Appetizers for 200 people, all made with traditional local ingredients, but presented with a contemporary touch. The night of the event arrived with an electric energy in the air. The main ballroom of the center gleamed under the light of hundreds of candles and artisanal lamps. The elite of Newport and international visitors circulated among charity art exhibitions, exotic drink stations, and music that fused New England folk with traditional Arabic sounds. Eliza had requested the day off from the center to be able to focus exclusively on the catering. Since dawn, she and her small team had worked preparing each bite with precision and love. Clam chowder served in small seashells, lobster bisque in spheres that burst in the mouth, crab cakes on beds of crystallized seaweed, slow-cooked beef on black olive bread. When she arrived at the center to set up her station, dressed not in her cleaning uniform but in the elegant black uniform of Dorothea's flavors, many employees didn't recognize her at first. Seeing her in this new role, directing her own team, was disconcerting for those who had only known her as part of the cleaning staff. The guests' reaction to her creations was enthusiastic. Soon a small crowd formed around her station, with people queuing to try what Gourmand magazine had called the true taste of New England. It was then that Karim appeared, surrounded by his usual entourage of assistants and partners. He wore an impeccable ivory Italian suit that dramatically contrasted with his tanned skin and perfectly trimmed beard. Upon seeing the crowd gathered around Eliza's station, his expression hardened momentarily before recovering his professional smile. "It seems our local element is having success," he commented to one of the organizers, with a tone that turned what should be a compliment into something almost derogatory. Eliza heard him clearly, but continued serving guests with professionalism and warmth, explaining the origins of each recipe, sharing anecdotes about her grandmother Dorothea and the culinary traditions of Rhode Island. As the night progressed, the tension between her and Karim silently intensified. He repeatedly passed near her station, each time more visibly irritated by the success she was having. Finally, when a well-known international gastronomic critic publicly praised Eliza's appetizers as the most authentic and exciting of the entire evening, something seemed to break in Karim's facade of control. He approached Eliza's station directly, flanked by Wallace and two assistants. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Merritt," he said with icy formality. "It seems you've forgotten your place tonight." An uncomfortable silence spread among the nearby guests, who immediately perceived the tension in the air. "I'm exactly where I should be, Mr. Al-Mansour," she responded calmly, "serving the guests with the best I can offer, as I have always done. As you have always done." His voice acquired a dangerous edge. "Until recently, what you offered was a well-mopped floor, not opinions on gastronomy." The insult was so direct, so deliberately humiliating in the presence of so many witnesses, that several guests exchanged looks of surprise and discomfort. It was one thing to maintain professional hierarchies in private, quite another to publicly degrade a person for their previous occupation. "My cleaning work I always performed with the same pride and dedication with which I now prepare these dishes," responded Eliza, struggling to maintain her composure. "Dignity doesn't depend on the uniform one wears, but on the respect with which one treats others and oneself." The response clearly wasn't what Karim expected. He had anticipated that she would shrink, embarrassed by the reference to her cleaning work. Instead, she had turned it into a statement of principles that resonated among those present, many of whom nodded silently, approving her words. Something dark crossed Karim's gaze. At that moment, he no longer saw Eliza as a simple, insubordinate employee, but as a symbol of resistance to everything he represented. And in his world, such resistance had to be exemplarily crushed. "Perhaps you should demonstrate your cleaning skills right now," he said with a cruel smile. "My suit seems to have a stain." He pointed to a perfectly clean part of his sleeve. "Kneel and clean it properly. Demonstrate to everyone that dignity you speak of." A murmur of disbelief ran through the group of spectators that had formed. The demand was so openly humiliating, so unnecessarily cruel, that even some of Karim's partners seemed uncomfortable. Eliza felt that time stopped. In that crystalline moment, she saw with perfect clarity that she had reached a point of no return. Any response she gave would define not only this night, but her entire future. Who she was, what she believed in, what she was willing to tolerate. She saw Samira among the crowd, her face a mask of contained indignation. She saw the other employees of the center, observing with expressions that mixed fear and cautious hope. She saw her assistants from Dorothea's Flavors, women like her who had found a new opportunity for professional dignity. And then she made her decision, a decision that would change everything. The 200 guests at the charity event held their breath. The silence in the luxurious ballroom was so dense it could be cut with a knife. Eliza remained erect, holding Karim's gaze without blinking, while her mind processed the public humiliation she had just suffered. "No," she finally responded with a clear and firm voice that resonated in the ballroom. "I will not kneel to clean a non-existent stain. Not today, not ever." The direct response seemed to surprise Karim as much as the rest of those present. In his world, refusals to his orders simply didn't exist, especially from people he considered subordinate. "You dare to disobey a direct order." His voice had lost all pretense of courtesy. "It's not a legitimate order," responded Eliza, maintaining an external calm that contrasted with the storm of emotions inside her. "It's an attempt at public humiliation that has no place in a professional event. Your place is where I say it is." Karim's facade of control finally cracked. "You work for me. This center belongs to me." It was then that Samira stepped forward, positioning herself beside Eliza. "Technically, Karim, tonight she doesn't work for you but for the organizing committee, of which I am a member, and this behavior is completely unacceptable." Several older Arab businessmen, respected figures in the community, exchanged looks of disapproval. In the traditional culture that many of them still valued, the public humiliation of workers, especially older women, was considered a serious lack of character. Karim perceived this and quickly tried to redirect the situation, recovering his professional smile. "I was just testing her commitment to excellence," he said, with a light tone that sounded completely false. "Evidently, Mrs. Merritt has changed her priorities. She is no longer willing to perform tasks that previously constituted her daily work." "My commitment has always been to excellence, Mr. Al-Mansour," responded Eliza. "But excellence includes mutual respect. Without that, any labor relationship becomes servitude." The words hung in the air, resonating with a truth that many of those present recognized but rarely verbalized. An elderly Saudi businessman visibly nodded, and others followed. Karim perceived that he was rapidly losing ground. In a desperate attempt to regain control of the situation, he committed his fatal error. "Your cheap philosophy doesn't impress anyone here, Merritt. You're a simple cleaner who has forgotten her place. And if you want to keep your job, you will clean my suit right now." It was the drop that overflowed the glass. Something broke inside Eliza, like a dam that finally gives way to accumulated pressure. Without a word, she walked to the nearest drink station, took a bucket of ice that was being used to cool champagne bottles, and returned to face Karim. What happened next occurred so quickly that witnesses could barely process it. With a fluid and deliberate movement, Eliza raised the bucket and poured its contents, ice-cold water with ice cubes, directly onto the head of Karim Al-Mansour. The liquid slid down his perfectly combed hair, stained the immaculate ivory Italian suit, and formed a puddle at his feet on the Atlantic marble. Drops fell from his chin, while his eyes reflected absolute disbelief. No one dared breathe. 200 pairs of eyes observed the scene, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Eliza still held the empty bucket, her arms trembling not from fear, but from pure adrenaline that ran through her veins like liquid fire. "My name is Eliza Merritt," she said with a firm voice breaking the sepulchral silence. "I am a professional who deserves respect, regardless of the task I perform. And no position, no wealth, no power gives anyone the right to trample on the dignity of another human being." She let the bucket drop, which rolled across the marble with a metallic sound that seemed amplified in the absolute silence. For an eternal instant, no one moved, as if the entire room were frozen in a surrealist painting. The powerful businessman dripping water, the middle-aged woman facing him without fear, the 200 witnesses holding their breath. "Do you know who I am?" Karim's voice vibrated with a controlled rage that was more threatening than any shout. "I know perfectly well who you are," responded Eliza. "The question is, do you know who I am?" Before Karim could respond, solitary applause broke the silence. Everyone turned to see Fatima Al-Fahim, the respected matriarch, slowly, deliberately applauding. She was joined by the elderly Saudi businessman who had nodded before, and then others, mainly businesswomen, young executives of the new generation, and surprisingly, several of the older Arab businessmen, men who valued honor and courage above social hierarchies. Karim looked around, disconcerted by this unexpected turn. The humiliation he had tried to inflict had turned against him. In traditional Arab culture, publicly losing control was considered a serious lack of character, especially for someone in a leadership position. And even more serious was the lack of hospitality and respect towards those who work under your roof, a fundamental principle in traditional Islamic teachings. "This will not stand," he murmured to Eliza, before turning to leave the ballroom, followed by a pale and nervous Wallace and some of his most loyal assistants. As soon as he disappeared, a wave of murmurs swept the room. Samira approached Eliza and hugged her. "That," she said with admiration and concern mixed, "was the bravest and craziest thing I've seen in my life." Eliza herself was surprised by what she had just done. Throughout her adult life, she had been the person who avoided conflicts, who accepted her assigned place, who adapted to circumstances to survive. Where had she found the courage to do something so drastic? The answer came in the form of a memory. Her grandmother Dorothea, standing in the doorway of her small house in Providence, confronting an abusive landlord who was trying to unjustly evict them. "In this house live people with dignity," the old woman had said. "And dignity is not sold or rented, it is defended." Those words, buried in her memory for decades, had surfaced at the precise moment, guiding her hand when she poured the water over Karim's head. It hadn't been an act of momentary anger, but the culmination of a long process of recovering her intrinsic value as a human being. While the guests regrouped and the event continued with a nervous but renewed energy, Fatima approached Eliza. "What you have done tonight," said the matriarch with a mixture of solemnity and warmth, "will have consequences, some difficult, others unexpectedly positive. But you will not be alone in facing them." Eliza nodded, fully understanding the warning and implicit support in those words. One thing was certain: there was no going back. For better or worse, her life had irreversibly changed in the instant she decided that her dignity was worth more than any security that submission could offer her. What she couldn't imagine then was how deep and extensive those consequences would be, not only for her, but for the entire community that had witnessed that moment of naked truth amid luxury and appearances. 6 months had passed since the bucket incident, as it was now known throughout Rhode Island. The story had spread like wildfire in a dry field, first as rumors in restaurants and bars, then as articles in the local press, and finally as a symbol of change in the labor dynamics of the region. Eliza contemplated the Atlantic from the terrace of her new location in the historic center of Providence. Dorothea's Flavors was no longer just a catering service, but a small restaurant with 12 tables that had to be reserved weeks in advance. The old New England house, with its centuries-old paneling and interior courtyard full of geranium pots and jasmine, offered the perfect setting for cuisine that honored traditions while looking toward the future. As Fatima had predicted, the consequences of that night had been complex and multifaceted. The most immediate was, of course, the loss of her job at the convention center. Karim had ordered her dismissal the next day, although curiously, the severance she received was considerably more generous than what was legally required. Later, she learned that this was due to the discreet intervention of the board of directors, concerned about the public repercussion that an unjustified dismissal could generate after the incident witnessed by so many influential people. What no one had anticipated was the chain reaction within the center. Inspired by Eliza's act, other employees began to organize to demand better conditions, to question labor practices that they had previously accepted as inevitable. Wallace, unable to handle this new dynamic and fearful of Karim's anger, submitted his resignation a month later. But the most significant change occurred in the very structure of the convention center. After an emergency meeting of the board of directors, where several traditional Arab investors expressed their discomfort with Karim's management methods and his treatment of employees, citing Islamic principles on fair treatment of workers, a restructuring was decided. Karim maintained his position as principal shareholder, but was relieved of direct personnel management, which passed to a professional team with modern and transparent labor policies. The Al Fahim Foundation, meanwhile, had dramatically expanded its programs in Rhode Island. Under the leadership of Samira and Fatima, it had established a training center for women in vulnerable situations, offering courses in hospitality, traditional crafts, and business management. Eliza collaborated regularly, sharing her experience and knowledge with other women who, like her just a year ago, sought to reinvent themselves professionally. This afternoon, however, she wasn't thinking about all that. She was focused on the last details for a special event, the official inauguration dinner of Dorothea's Flavors as an established restaurant. "Mom, the journalists are already arriving," announced Wren, who had requested a leave of absence from the university to help her mother with the business management. "And Phoebe just called. Her train arrives in half an hour." Eliza nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude for having her daughters close again. The expanding business had created opportunities for the whole family. Wren contributed her knowledge of cultural management and digital marketing, while Phoebe, who continued working as a nurse in New York, came on weekends to help and was considering moving permanently to Providence. "Have you seen the final guest list?" asked Eliza, mentally reviewing the preparations. "Yes, all confirmed, including him." Wren hesitated a moment before adding, "Are you sure about this, Mom? After everything that happened?" Eliza smiled with serenity. The invitation to Karim al-Mansour had been her personal decision, one that had surprised everyone, including Samira. It wasn't an act of reconciliation. Some wounds were too deep for that, but a gesture that closed a circle, that demonstrated she had overcome fear and resentment to find an inner peace that no one could take from her. "I'm completely sure," she responded. "It's not about him, Wren, it's about me, about who I am now, about the woman I've become." The first stars were beginning to appear in the sky when the guests started to arrive. Gastronomic journalists, regular clients who had become friends, local business people who had supported the project, and of course Samira and Fatima, who entered with gifts and effusive hugs. "This place is exactly as I imagined it," said Samira, admiring the decoration that fused traditional New England elements with contemporary touches. Authentic, but not folkloric, welcoming but sophisticated. "Like its owner," added Fatima with a warm smile. As the restaurant filled, Eliza moved among the guests with a quiet confidence that she would never have imagined possessing a year ago. She was no longer the woman who shrank in the presence of the powerful, who automatically lowered her gaze, who accepted being invisible. This new Eliza looked people in the eye, expressed her opinions, occupied her space in the world without apologies or justifications. When Karim al-Mansour appeared at the entrance, an expectant silence ran through the place. He came alone, without the usual entourage of assistants, dressed with discreet elegance. His face was an imperturbable mask, while his eyes scanned the restaurant until stopping on Eliza. She approached to receive him with the dignity of a hostess who welcomes one more guest, neither with resentment nor with special deference. "Mr. al-Mansour, thank you for accepting my invitation," she said with a serene voice. Karim slightly inclined his head, a minimal but significant gesture coming from a man of his position. "Congratulations on your success, Merritt. This place reflects your vision." It was the closest to an acknowledgement she could expect from him, and Eliza accepted it as such. They weren't friends and never would be, but in that brief exchange there was a reluctant respect that 6 months ago would have seemed impossible. The dinner was a resounding success. Eliza had prepared a tasting menu that narrated a journey through traditional New England cuisine. From the seafood flavors of Rhode Island to the country influences of Maine, each dish told a story, evoked a landscape, honored a tradition. Between the main course and dessert, Samira stood up and asked for everyone's attention. "I would like to propose a toast," she said, raising her glass. "To Eliza Merritt, a woman who has taught us that true dignity doesn't come from titles or positions, but from the courage to defend what is just, from respect for the traditions that nourish us, and from the determination to create new paths when old ones no longer serve us." The guests stood up, even Karim, though with an indecipherable expression. "And also," continued Samira, "for all those who work in the shadows, keeping clean the spaces others dirty, preparing food others enjoy, sustaining with tireless hands the world we all share. Their dignity is non-negotiable, their worth incalculable, and it's time we all recognize it. "To Eliza!" exclaimed several voices in unison. As the glasses rose, Eliza felt an emotion that squeezed her chest. She saw her daughters smiling at her with pride, her employees, many of them women who, like her, had found a second chance, nodding with recognition, Fatima and Samira radiant with satisfaction for the path traveled together. But above all, she saw her grandmother Dorothea, that woman of cracked hands and unbreakable dignity who had taught her the most important lesson, that respect is not begged for, it is demanded with one's own conduct, that true wealth is not measured in properties, but in authentic relationships, that a person's worth is not determined by others, but by one's own conviction of deserving it. Later, when the last guests were leaving and the restaurant fell quiet, Eliza went out again to the terrace. The Atlantic stretched before her, dark and mysterious under the starry sky, the same sea that had witnessed civilizations that rose and fell, fortunes that were built and vanished, ordinary people who, like her, found within themselves a strength they never suspected they possessed. Sometimes, she thought, contemplating the lights of boats in the distance, the calmest water runs the deepest, and sometimes a single drop of courage can overflow oceans of fear. With that certainty in her heart, Eliza Merritt closed the doors of her restaurant and walked home, not as the woman who once cleaned floors feeling invisible, but as someone who had recovered the most valuable of treasures, the unbreakable conviction of her own worth.